Morning. It is 8:40 right now. Welcome back to the program. Lou and Jackie here.
And we have bankruptcy attorney Mike Jankins in giving us some great tips this morning. We're always talking about bankruptcy and trying to help you out and giving you the right steps to take. But sometimes we want to get those tips before we get to the bankruptcy part. So what are some financial aids or tips you can give us today to make sure hopefully we don't get to that point?
Well, if you hope to someday not have to call me for advice, which that's a good thing for most people. I feel there's certain conduct and habits that people form that are risky, that can lead you to have to file bankruptcy someday. So rather than lead a risky financial life with the chance you might have to take bankruptcy, I am always liking to play it safe. And if you play it safe, you probably won't ever have to call a bankruptcy attorney.
Okay, now people are probably watching TV right now saying, why is a bankruptcy attorney telling me how not to get into a situation where I need bankruptcy?
Well, my goal is to help people, and hopefully we can help people before it's too late so they don't have to worry about needing help.
There you go. All right.
Just like doctors tell you how you can live healthy so you don't have to go see the doctor, well, this is kind of the same thing.
Same premise. Okay, got it.
Live financially healthy.
So what are some of those habits we should hopefully not recognize in our own life? You
know, one thing that I think is pretty important, a lot of people work jobs that have lots of overtime, and overtime jobs pay quite well, at least the overtime hours. It's not uncommon that people get time and a half for overtime, and if they're working Sundays, they get double pay for their work. And there's many factory jobs, the post office workers, or just some to name a few, that can work substantial amounts of overtime and make tens of thousands of dollars in overtime pay.
That's good money.
And it's not uncommon that you can make this for kind of a long time, but sometimes they pull the plug, they look at their budgets and they go, oh, we're like $1 billion in the hole, we gotta maybe figure something out. And so all of a sudden they say, well, there's not gonna be any more overtime. Well, people have tended to live their lives on the fact they're going to get this overtime, and it's not guaranteed. So all these tens of thousands of dollars, when people go to buy their house, if somebody's making $90,000 because they're getting all this overtime, but really their salary, if you want to call it that, it's really like 55 or 60. Even though you've had it historically, it's just not a good idea to count on it always being there, because it's overtime, it's extra, and that just may not be there either at all or in the same amounts that you've been getting it. So when you buy your homes and buy your cars, you really should be buying these things with the idea that I'm going to get it based on what I make guaranteed.
Your base salary.
Your base, so that if overtime goes down in amount or disappears altogether, you're not faced with a situation where all of a sudden you're going to lose everything. You know, where you might have been able to afford a mortgage payment that was $1,800 or $1,900 a month, and now you can only afford $1,300 or $1,400. You could lose your home. You could lose your vehicles if you, again, figure, oh, I can afford this payment of $600 a month, when maybe you won't be able to afford that payment someday if overtime disappears. It's just a good idea not to rely on it. If it's there, great, it's extra. You can do extra things if you have it, but for long-term obligations, you really don't want to rely on it. You can get yourselves into big trouble, and we see it all the time. So, you know, it's not just a matter of losing your job. I mean, losing that overtime almost is like losing part of a job. So don't rely on it, and best to just save some of that money in a savings account, so you have what they call a rainy day fund. So sometime if you get hurt or your overtime does go down, you've got money saved up to carry you through a time where you may not have quite as much pay.
Was talking to someone just yesterday about this very fact. For more than 20 years, they worked for the same company, and they said they had great OT overtime, and the company just told them, guess what, we're not doing it anymore. We're spending too much money on overtime, so we're pulling the plug on this, and they're going to ratchet it back. Exact situation.
And not only that, I mean, I've been reading articles, we're facing automation, and they're talking about how some workers' jobs are being displaced because of technology, and if not displaced altogether, again, this may affect the overtime hours when there may be other ways some of this work might be getting done. So yeah, it's just not a good idea to just assume it's always going to be there, because sometimes it disappears.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned, you're mentioning these various habits because it is things you see in your office on a regular basis. So let's talk about another one of those habits we want to watch out for.
Well, another real big one, and I think for any regular viewers of the show that have seen me, I've talked a lot about the way people use their credit cards, and these are just really bad habits that people get, and it's not a minority of people. I mean, people who aren't in financial trouble yet just have way too many credit cards, charge way too many things, and build up way too big of credit card balances. And it is lower income people that get credit cards, and it's people that make lots of money. Then I've never really quite understood why people that are making six-figure incomes need to be carrying $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 in revolving credit card debt.
Wow.
I mean, if you make good money, why don't you just pay cash for things and you got the money? But you know, everybody, regardless of earnings, just tends to overspend. The more you make, the more you spend.
Is it because it's easy? You think, oh, I'll pay it off later, and you just get caught up in the whirlwind of interest and all that kind of stuff? I know a lot of times for people that go to college, you kind of get caught up early because they just are handing you credit cards in college, and then you realize, oops, later on that, yeah, I have to pay these back, and there's interest attached to it, so you kind of learn your lesson that way. Or why do we get caught up in this madness?
Part of it is because it's so easy. Part of it, I call we're in an instant gratification society. If you want something, you just get it now because you can, instead of actually affording it and saving up,
budgeting
and budgeting for it. And the other thing is, people that are making lots of money didn't always make lots of money. So they may have, going up the ladder, used credit cards and bought things when they wanted to. And now they can buy nicer things when they want to because more credit's made available. And so they just buy bigger and shinier things than they did when they made half as much as they do. But again, this whole concept of using credit cards is something that this culture grows up with. And so it just becomes a way of life. And it's kind of playing financial Russian roulette, because no jobs forever. No business is forever. I mean, the best of businesses can fail. I mean, we're seeing big companies that have been around with us for an entire lifetime, like Sears, starting to go down the drain.
Right.
And so there's nothing that's exempt, and the best of job that you've been at for 20, 25 years could disappear. So you really don't want to be having these big kind of debts that you didn't really need to have, because if you have an interruption in income, all of a sudden the house of cards comes toppling down and you're calling a bankruptcy attorney. So don't put yourself in that situation. And it's not bad to use credit cards, but I feel the best way to use it is to just, so you don't have to carry big wads of cash everywhere. And if you charge for things, just pay them off at the end of the month, and actually own them. Or if you're going to make a big purchase, at least do it in a way where you're going to pay it off in the next few months, instead of just paying minimum payments and just having those balances grow and grow. And you're going from $10,000, all of a sudden you're up to $15,000, and then you're just making minimum payments.
Yeah, because that money you're using on your credit card is basically a loan, and you're paying the loan back
at a really high interest rate.
At a really high interest rate. And speaking of loans, let's jump to item number 7 on your list here, because this is one I think can catch people off guard.
Yeah, I think this is a ticking time bomb. Co-signing loans for your friends, co-signing loans for your relatives, be it your granddaughter or grandson or your brother or sister. First of all, there's a reason that the bank's wanting you to co-sign. It's because the person that's trying to get the loan doesn't have good credit.
Right.
So if they don't have good credit, they're a high risk. So if they're a high risk to the bank, well, they're a high risk to you. And if if the bank's not willing to lend the money on their own, where they want you to back it up, that's risky business. It's one thing if you're just signing with your spouse, but even if it's a long-term boyfriend or girlfriend, well, long-term sometimes terminate just like marriages, and then those things go nowhere but bad. We see so many situations where people have co-signed, and the person who was a high risk ended up making bad on the loan, just as one might expect. And it's not all the time, but again, it's risky business. So that person loses their job and doesn't pay it. the car gets repossessed, and guess what? They're coming after you. And when these cars get repossessed, they're not exactly just small amounts that they come after you for. The car goes to an automobile auction that dealers go to, and if the car was purchased new within the last 2 or 3 years, there's a substantial amount that's going to end up being owed. It's not uncommon where there's over $10,000, $15,000 left owing on these loans, and they're going to come after you where you may have been living happily along financially, maybe only had a couple credit cards, using them responsibly, may have your own car payments, and all of a sudden you got this big debt chasing you, and you're not making $100,000 a year, and you may have a family. Now you got to file bankruptcy because of somebody else. Well, it's bad enough if you got to file bankruptcy because of your own poor decisions, but you sure don't want to file bankruptcy because of somebody else's.
Right.
So the best idea is don't co-sign. And we see situations where a parent won't or can't co-sign for one of their kids. So then grandma goes and co-signs the loan, and it's just like, well, that just isn't good. And some of these people are on a fixed income. And so I just shake my head, but I see it all the time. I feel so sorry for these people. They're trying to be nice to their relative or their friend, and it blows up on them, and they're the one that ends up in a bankruptcy.
Right.
And the other person might end up in a bankruptcy too, but they don't really care because they didn't have good credit in the first place.
Down
and you've seen these all firsthand.
We see this every day.
There's many more we can talk about, and let's do that at a future date. But if people want to get in touch with you because they're realizing these are habits that are already in their lifestyles, and there's something they can do to help, and that is by contacting you. How can they do that?
You can call me at my phone number at 255-1855, or you can find me on the internet at www.iowa-bankruptcylaw.com.
That works. Michael Jankins, thank you very much. Great job as always. It is 8:52, and we will be right back. This is CW Iowa Live in West Des Moines.